Tuapse has been attacked again, and beachgoers are swimming in fuel oil. In addition, key Russian airfields are under drone attack. The headquarters of the Black Sea Fleet in Crimea was hit by Storm Shadow missiles. There are many dead officers. Russia has started buying expensive gasoline from Belarus, but it will only be sold to security forces. Muscovites will switch to bicycles. The rout of Putin's army at the front. They are retreating in the Zaporizhzhia direction. Ukrainian forces advance on Berdyansk, AD, and by Mariupol. Russia and Belarus prepare missile and drone strikes on Ukraine. An open threat to Lukashenko. His palace is one of the targets of the Ukrainian armed forces. Scandal. Israel has officially accused Ukraine of Nazism because of the reburial of OUN commander Melnyk. The Ukrainian armed forces have reached Kaliningrad. There is panic in the city. Airports are closed. There is no money. Russians will be forced to work twice as much. Putin has signed a decree. Trump has gone mad. The US is completely stopping military aid to Ukraine. Poland is being prepared for war with Russia. You have to hear this. Patrushev publicly called Putin names. A bold priest of the Russian Orthodox Church told Patriarch Kirill the whole truth about the war right to his face. My name is Katerina Yestarenko, and right now, here are the main stories. But first, please like this video and subscribe to our channel so we don't lose each other on YouTube. Explosions in Russia are already becoming a national tradition, and this night was especially hot for the swamp dwellers. Drones massively attacked Tuapse, Taganrog, Voronezh, the occupied Donetsk, and Crimea.
An incoming missile flew in, and there were 2 other missiles before that.
In Tuapse, reports are coming in about strikes on the local oil refinery, which has a capacity of about 12 million tons of oil per year, and a major fire that broke out after the attack. In Taganrog, according to local social media, drones may have struck the aircraft repair plant, where a fire also broke out. And in Voronezh, there are reports of explosions in the area of the Baltimore Air Base.
A very good morning to you, Nazar.
The Russian-installed occupation governor of Sevastopol, Mikhail Razvozheyev, has officially reported and claimed that the city was recently attacked, specifically by long-range Storm Shadow missiles. Several direct hits have been recorded by local sources, including a significant strike on the main headquarters of the Russian Federation's Black Sea Fleet. Meanwhile, in the occupied city of Makyivka, there was another reported strike occurring on the territory of a local gas station. Free for all.
You can place your order, or for free.
As the Russians like to say, this is just the beginning. Even though Tuapse has already been hit for the 5th time, the authorities keep pretending that everything is under control. That's why they've announced that the swimming season will open there next week. And here's an example of what it's like to swim there.
I'm enjoying this scene. Nice. White sand, yeah, you say?
Moreover, oil slicks reached the beaches of Anapa just a few days before the season opened. Satellite images showed pollution in Vityazevo, Gemete, and the central beaches of the city. Environmentalists say that there are now oil patches in the sea covering hundreds of square kilometers. Despite this, the authorities of the Soviet Union could not find a single beach that could not be considered fit for use. To open the swimming season already in June. Well, what can I say? Good luck. Moreover, because of these attacks on oil, gasoline is suffering. It has become known that the Russian Federation has increased purchases of expensive gasoline from Belarus amid drone attacks. Fuel sales from Belarus on the exchange in May increased 58 times. The regime is forced to buy expensive fuel because of the successful drone attacks, which have seriously battered oil and its processing in the central and western parts of the country. For now, the import volumes are small on the scale of Russia, but for the border regions, this has become a way to avoid shortages. But what should be done about the shortage across the whole country? According to Russian insiders, the government will decide who gets to buy fuel first. In the
military, police, FSB, critical infrastructure transport, and the church will be prioritized. Public transport will be refueled as fuel becomes available, and the population will be allocated a quota, no more than 10% of what is supplied.
To put it in more comprehensive terms, what we are witnessing right now is the initial phase of a major Russian military offensive that is currently unfolding across the front lines. This significant escalation involves a coordinated series of maneuvers and strategic deployments, signaling that the long-anticipated push by their armed forces has officially commenced in earnest, marking a critical new chapter in the ongoing conflict. I always enjoy reading your comments. And for now, we continue. Next comes the most interesting part. The Russian offensive is starting to stall. For the first time in a long while, the occupiers are being forced to retreat in the Zaporizhzhia and Dnipropetrovsk directions. This was stated by the head of the Council of Reservists of the Ground Forces, Ivan Timoshka. In addition, footage of Russian equipment being destroyed is appearing more and more frequently in the occupied territories.
Look at this Demid, a heavy Kamaz truck. Apparently, it was just hit earlier today out in the open field right near the highway, and somehow it just ended up sitting there.
And not just on the front line, but deep behind enemy lines as well. Demid. Ukrainian strikes on logistics and supply depots are increasingly knocking the Russian army out of its rhythm. A separate problem for the Russians, the new Ukrainian naval drones. Ukraine has started using unmanned boats, not only as kamikazes, but as fully fledged strike platforms. They can carry FPV drones and in fact, this means that Ukrainian FPV drones can now launch directly from the sea, much closer to their targets. And the naval drones themselves are capable of striking equipment, fortifications, and Russian coastal positions. Experts are already acknowledging that, for Russia, the threat now comes not only from naval drones that sink ships, but also from floating platforms that can deliver missiles and strike drones right up to the occupier's shore. I never cease to admire the courage and heroism of Ukrainian soldiers. They hold the front and stand against the enemy, but not just the enemy, but that's why I urge you to support the armed forces of Ukraine. And if you can't do so financially, write them words of encouragement in the comments. I know they're watching us. The Belarusian Ministry of Defense has claimed that supposedly 100 Ukrainian drones entered the country over the course of a week. They added that in some cases, these were not accidental incursions, but allegedly attempts to strike elements of border infrastructure. And this is exactly how Belarus is preparing the ground for launching drones and missiles from its territory, and as the Institute for the Study of Drones says, to introduce into Ukraine from the territory of Belarus. Moreover, the Lukashenko regime continues to prepare Belarus for war. The Ministry of Defense has begun exercises on logistical support. If any Belarusian residents are watching us, tell us in the comments, has full-scale mobilization really started there? How do you feel about your country preparing for war? Be sure to write. Do you remember that legendary gesture which in the year Ukrainian border guards in Belarus to advance on Ukraine? Back then, everything was clear to Belarusians without words, but now the conversation has reached the political level. While Belarus is increasingly building up military infrastructure near the borders, Ukraine is already openly warning that in the event of any attack, the response will be immediate and harsh. Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiga stated that Ukraine does not plan any offensive actions against Belarus. At the same time, there are already any attempt at invasion from the territory of the Republic of Belarus will receive a mirror response. Against this backdrop, Ukrainian military officials are speaking more openly about preparations for possible developments in the north. The commander of the UAV forces of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Madyar, reported that reconnaissance has already identified the first military targets on the territory of Belarus. These are sites that could be struck in the event that Minsk directly enters the war on Russia's side. Meanwhile, the state assumes that the State Border Guard Service is recording increased military activity at the border, the establishment of artillery positions, and the construction of roads and engineering infrastructure. That is why the northern direction remains one of the most closely monitored by Ukrainian defense forces. And although there is currently no large-scale grouping for an offensive in Belarus, Kyiv makes it clear that a scenario of a renewed invasion will no longer come as a surprise. And what do you think? Will Lukashenko dare to directly involve Belarus in the war? Or is this just an attempt at pressure of Ukraine? Share your opinion in the comments. The reburial of one of the OUN leaders, Andriy Melnyk in Ukraine has sparked an international scandal. Israel officially condemned the state ceremony, stating that it is unacceptable to honor people who collaborated with the Nazis. The Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs emphasized that one cannot ignore historical truth and the memory of the victims of Nazism. However, one of Ukraine's most respected historians, Yaroslav Hrytsak, draws attention to the fact that the question of Melnyk's role and the OUN EMA during World War II is much more complicated than it is presented in political statements. He emphasizes that the OUN was not a Nazi organization in the ideological sense, and its cooperation with Germany was tactical in nature, aimed at fighting against the USSR. Moreover, after Ukrainian nationalists attempted to promote the idea of independence, the Nazis themselves began repressions against part of the OUN leadership. Andriy Melnyk ultimately ended up in the Sachsenhausen concentration camp. Nevertheless, the topic of Ukrainian nationalism during World War II remains one of the most painful and controversial, especially at the international level. Just remember the polls, for example. During the years of independence, such interest in our own history, both from politicians and the people, has unfortunately been extremely rare. Now, Ukrainians are beginning to appreciate with dignity what many generations before us have done for Ukraine. From the perspective of realizing one's national identity, this is extremely important, especially in times when this identity is being targeted for erasure from memory. But here another problem arises. So the main question: is it possible today to honor the figures of the Ukrainian liberation movement without provoking new historical conflicts with Ukraine's current allies? Share your opinion in the comments. While Ukraine is asking for more Patriot missiles due to Russia's massive attacks, the US has allowed Poland to produce missiles for these systems at its own factories. Washington still has not granted Ukraine such permission, even within Europe. Against this backdrop, the overall US policy toward Europe and Ukraine is raising more and more questions. Washington has effectively suspended new military aid packages to Kyiv without providing an explanation. It was precisely due to disagreement with this change in course that former US ambassador to Ukraine, Bridget Brink, resigned. At the same time, the US has also begun to reconsider its military presence in Europe. First, the Trump administration cancelled the redeployment of 4,000 troops to Poland and then announced its intention to send 5,000. In Warsaw, they openly talk about the fact that the United States has become increasingly unpredictable in its actions toward Poland. This is despite the fact that Warsaw has invested $50 billion in American weaponry. At the Pentagon, there is more and more talk about reducing forces in Europe and shifting focus to the Pacific region and containing China. Well, you get the idea. When it comes to American policy, nothing is clear anymore. And not just to us. Russians are being driven into the meat grinder of war with renewed force. Putin needs cannon fodder, instead of the 1.5 million already killed. A new wave of mobilization is underway. We will talk about the methods used to drive people to the front and about which Russians, against their will, are at risk of finding themselves face to face with Ukrainian drones.
The lack of visible successes on the battlefield and the evaporation of the Anchorage spirit. Putin is cornered, and the only way to break out of this dead end quickly, even if only for a short time, is through mobilization when a significant influx of new blood enters the Russian army all at once.
It could call up several 100,000 people, around 1 million. This could, well, it's hard to say exactly how this mass of people will be distributed, but apparently about a third, maybe a certain percentage, will be sent to the active army to replenish those units and formations that are not fully staffed with personnel. That's true. This will seriously strengthen the military potential of the Russian Federation.
The Kremlin is resisting as much as it can, announcing this unpopular measure. But the supply of convicts in Russian penal colonies is dwindling, and the huge enlistment bonuses of hundreds of thousands of rubles in 2026 no longer attract many people. Even the convict community is forced to admit that the army is getting outright riffraff.
Those who are simply brought in. All these black recruiters gather up alcoholics, people with cerebral palsy, people with various disorders, and they just hand them over like unwanted goods.
Like slaves.
Like slaves. They get paid for it. Then the cards that are issued to these people are taken away. The guys send me videos. They say, Nastya, here's some new arrivals for us. No fingers. And how do you...
Mobilization, although unofficial, is happening in Russia. Moreover, according to the new legislation, this process is year-round. For now, the authorities have activated the repressive machine wherever they could, forcing people to supposedly sign contracts voluntarily.
This year, for the first time, we are recording more incoming phone calls per day to our hotline. If we talk about the customer profile, I can provide a detailed list of some new. These are people who have never contacted us before. I would say that first and foremost, these are students, and by the way, female students as well, because the trend of the last probably several months is that these students are also being forced and actively persuaded to sign contracts. In some universities, they even call it alternative service, although it's quite strange to use that term in the same sentence and see the words alternative service and contract side by side, but nevertheless, this is another way they try to deceive people, and they pressure these students to sign the contract. As of today, we have already received such reports from more than 50 regions, so in reality, this is almost the entire country.
In addition, inventive officials are skillfully pulling the wool over people's eyes.
We are recording more and more cases where people are actually being deceived, are lured into signing a contract, to the point where, for example, a recent case involved people receiving advertisements for a contract service through the government services portal, which is called some kind of alternative service. But in reality, if people sign the contract, they become something like serfs of the Ministry of Defense. It doesn't matter what you were promised when you signed the contract. Maybe you were told you would be a driver in the Rostov region, but as soon as at the exact same time that these events were unfolding, several other important developments were also beginning to take place simultaneously in the background.
The Kremlin is preparing. The publication Verska notes an increase in interest regarding mobilization orders, which may also indicate the scale of the Russian Ministry of Defense's plans. According to Yandex's WordStat service, in April, 45,000 Russians searched for information about mobilization orders. That's 4 times more often than a year ago.
Google Trends also records a similar increase. Among the popular queries is the question of what to do if a mobilization order has been pasted in.
A mobilization order is a document that is pasted into a military ID. It obligates a person to report to the assembly point immediately after mobilization is announced without any additional summons.
So essentially, this is in advance. And in theory, anyone who is listed in the reserves can formally receive it in wartime.
Everyone received summons. Basically, they got mobilization orders. And of course, they were recruited for contract service. They said there would supposedly be a mobilization, so it would be better to sign a contract right away. There are rumors that there won't be a mobilization for now. But in the event of war, if war is declared specifically, I am required to arrive at a designated location within 2 hours.
Hello everyone, I'm a medic from Samara, and I received a summons from the Military Enlistment Office to update my personal information and military registration specialty. Since, as we all know, medics are subject to military duty, they really do update your information, ask what has changed, what hasn't, and accordingly what's happening now. Right now they're issuing this kind of pink slip, it's called a mobilization order. As far as I know, right now, this is being given to almost all medics and
guys who are also now receiving summonses and are in the reserve.
In addition, human rights activists are already recording cases where, after visiting the military enlistment office, Russian men of conscription age are being banned from leaving the country. Naturally, it would not be difficult for the Russian authorities to close all borders at once. Therefore, as experts note, opponents of mobilization do not have much time to. Currently in Russia, citizens are facing severe problems not only with the rising cost and scarcity of gasoline, but also with a significant lack of available money. The national budget deficit has grown to such an alarming extent that even high-ranking officials within the State Duma have begun to openly and loudly express their deep discontent regarding the country's current economic trajectory.
Well, let's take a look. And what are we going to do about the federal budget deficit? Last year we had more than trillions, and now it's almost trillions already. So in total, that's about trillions already. What are we going to do about this? Are we going to print money or something like in 1992 when prices went up by 30% every week? But we understand, right? That's not a solution. That means we need to find money somewhere. Yes, I understand that entrepreneurship.
This was how Deputy Valerie Hartung spoke out, complaining about the money in the budget. But instead of stopping the war, they decided to collect more money from businesses, which are already shutting down. Brilliant. But when Deputy Prime Minister Patrushev reported to Putin about the sowing campaign, he only talked about successes. So it's no wonder if Putin really doesn't know what's going on. By the way, Patrushev called Vladimir Vladimirovich Palayevich.
I would like to thank you very much. I have carefully put together a presentation for you today.
He blurted out the name of Putin's double. For the first time in years, Russians will have to work twice as much. Also, workers in hazardous and dangerous industries can now be called back from vacation. All of this is provided for by the new law of the Kremlin dictator Putin, who is doing everything possible to plug the labor shortage in various sectors. Will this idea help the Russian economy? Our journalists will tell you more about it.
For the first time in 50 years, Russians will have to work twice as much. Putin has signed the corresponding law. The document doubles the overtime work limit that was established back in the Soviet era in order to cover the labor shortage in the economy, which now affects sectors ranging from factories to prisons.
Today, I expect to hear detailed reports on the current situation in the economy and on why the trajectory of macroeconomic indicators is still below expectations.
Now, instead of the current limit of 120 overtime hours per year, the new standard will be 240 hours. The law also lifts the ban on recalling workers from vacation in hazardous and dangerous industries.
Accordingly, why are Putin and the Russian leadership raising this production quota? Because in reality, there are problems with staffing, there aren't enough people, so they will demand more. The pay remains the same, but the demands are increasing.
It has been stated that thanks to overtime hours, it will be possible to offset thousands of additional jobs and increase the competitiveness of Russian companies in the global market.
Officially, Russia likes to say, and Putin likes to repeat, that unemployment is low there. But in reality, why is unemployment low? Because there is no one to fill the jobs. In the present day and age, based on the most recent and comprehensive data-driven estimates available to us regarding the specific metrics and figures that are being analyzed in this context, which provide a detailed and nuanced perspective on the situation as it stands right now, we can observe several key trends.
By Bloomberg Economics, Russia is short 1.5 million workers, which is comparable to the population of cities like Yekaterinburg or Novosibirsk.
Overall, in January and February, GDP decreased by 1.8%. The manufacturing sectors and industrial production as a whole were in the negative, as was such an important and systemically significant area as construction. Yes, among the reasons for the negative trend, experts point to calendar, weather, and so-called seasonal factors. Well, as I already mentioned at the last meeting, we are well aware of this. There was one less working day in February.
The bill to increase working hours was initiated by the Russian Union of Industrialists and Entrepreneurs. According to their estimates, by the end of the decade, the country will face a labor shortage of 3 million people.
In the USSR, they reached Kaliningrad. For the first time since the start of the full-scale war, the airport there was closed due to Ukrainian drones. But here's what actually happened. Watch our report.
War is knocking on NATO's door. For the first time since February 24, 2022, an air raid alert and the carpet plan in Kaliningrad coincided remarkably with an escalation on Russia's border with the Baltic states.
The air raid siren sounded after statements from the military and political leadership of the occupying country that any scenarios for eliminating the Russian escalation in Kaliningrad, any actions within the strategic territory of the Kaliningrad region, would likely be perceived and interpreted by the officials within the Russian Kremlin in Moscow as a direct provocation.
Propagandists have already managed to accuse the Baltic countries of providing their territory for strikes on Kaliningrad. The Russian authorities are gradually preparing society and the state apparatus for the opening of new fronts.
There is an old saying,
well, it's not a proverb or a parable, but an old rule. Wherever many Russian troops set foot,
The laws passed by the State Duma regarding the armed protection of citizens abroad, as well as the escalation of insults and threats from both propagandists and officials directed at the Baltic countries, indicate that Moscow is preparing for a new stage of the war.
A person who graduated from some NATO college comes out and starts talking about how he's going to fight Russia. Who? You're going to fight? Your country will be destroyed within the very first minutes of attempting such a war. They need to be aware of this. They just practiced in Vilnius now, but sooner or later, what is being discussed here in the studio will come true. And sooner or later, that announcement may be made, telling citizens to leave their major European cities or those of certain countries.
Now, more than ever before, Putin needs new victories and media publicity. Against the backdrop of internet shutdowns and economic decline, more and more Russians are becoming disillusioned with the Führer. And lacking success in the war with Ukraine, the dictator might opt for a small, victorious war.
In addition to the various points that we have already discussed, let us now carefully take a look at another crucial and important example that further illustrates this particular point quite clearly to ensure we understand the context fully.
Important factor is time, which is working against Putin. Europe, albeit slowly, is rearming and strengthening its positions, and the esteemed partner Donald Trump, in the fall, after the midterm elections in Congress, may lose control over US foreign policy. At the same time, the alliance is seriously preparing for war. The US is further reinforcing the eastern flank by deploying 5,000 troops to Poland. Macron, for the first time since the start of the war, is calling Lukashenko. And how can one not recall that before the Russian army invaded Ukraine, the president of France also tried to influence Putin's decision.
Of course, I understand we share a common concern about what is happening in the security sphere in Europe. In
Lithuania, they even consider war to be almost inevitable, suggesting a preemptive strike on Russia's appendix to the Kaliningrad region.
We need to show the Russians that we can break through the small fortress they've built in Kaliningrad. NATO has the means too, in the event of a crisis, level to the ground. The Russian air defense bases and missile bases there.
For the Baltic countries and the entire eastern flank of NATO, the inviolability of Article 5 of the alliance is an existential issue. Will the West have enough political will to go to war against Russia in response to the outbreak of hostilities?
Do you remember Metropolitan Hilarion from the Russian Orthodox Church who was detained in the Czech Republic with white powder? Well, he's already been released. Right now I could talk about how crazy all these Russian patriotic priests are, but as it turns out, there are actually a couple of reasonable people among them. Here's a video of one such person.
I just wanted to express some disagreement with these patriotic tendencies in church documents and in general in the life of our local church. A priest's duty is to invest in the kingdom of heaven, not in patriotism.
That's really something, isn't it, Father? You're not playing for the West, are you? Go now. Sit yourself down. And seriously think about every single word that you just blurted out so recklessly.
If you know the name of this priest, write it in the comments. That's all for now. Please like this video and don't forget to subscribe to our channel, Ukraine Today, so you don't miss our next episodes. See you soon.